Say this is part 4 here. We finished up. We were talking about the Algonquins and kind of how they fished and used the waters and things like that. So we're going to part 4 here. Okay. Now, what this stuff is, the Algonquins and the Iroquois. So we haven't talked about the Iroquois much yet. We'll get into them, but they used seashells and bones and porcupine quills, because porcupine quills are hollow, and all kinds of stuff like that to make something that was very important to their people. So here you get a little example of it. To find these blue and purplish sort of seashells and things was kind of special to them. And it took a lot of work. They were kind of polishing them and shaping them into shapes and drilling holes through them to bead them and things like that. And what they ended up using this stuff for was, a lot of times, they would take these shells or porcupine quills or whatever they were using, and what they would do is they'd weave them into these belts with different detailed patterns on. So this is, like deer hide here, and it's woven in there, and some of these are porcupine quills, and some of them are the seashells that they've, sort of rounded and put holes through so they could weave these together. This one's using, some sort of kind of like natural string in the seashells and stuff to make these different patterns on here. All right, we'll come back. We're going to talk about what this is called. You might know already, maybe you don't. Okay, this stuff is known as, it's called wampum. And what wampum is we're going to see kind of the different things that they would use them for. But these different patterns that they would weave on here meant different things to different tribes in the Algonquin peoples. This one you're going to see, this is an Iroquois thing. This represents the Iroquois League. And when we get to there, you'll kind of see how this represents the Iroquois League. So these wampum, a lot of times they were made into belts or things they would kind of like hang over their shoulders and things. And they were very important to them. This thing took a lot of time, and they represented some very important things. So this stuff's called wampum. All right, wampum used for a lot of different purposes. The pattern on the wampum meant different things. So sometimes it told the history of a tribe. Maybe they had a wampum belt that was very special to their specific tribe, and it told the history of their leaders and their tribe and stuff. Sometimes it could be used to send messages from one village to the next. Maybe there were special wampum belts that represented, like, help, we're in trouble, we're being attacked by another village, and we need you. So like a runner would go running to another village and take the wampum belt, and it symbolized that or something. Or it could be sent to spread a message like, hey, we're going to have a celebration in our tribe, and you're invited to come if you see this wampum belt, something like that. It could be given as a gift for important events, okay, or given to important people. And then sometimes it was used to barter for goods, almost kind of like a form of currency. They didn't have money, but sometimes, let's say I had a dozen deer hides that I wanted to use to make buckskin clothing out of, and the other guys had a bunch of wampum belts. These things were very important and time consuming, and they meant a lot of respect and things about people. So sometimes they would trade wampum for like other things that they needed to barter, right? Remember, to barter was to trade for things of equal value. So they might barter for these wampum belts. Very important to the people. All right, and as the year goes on, we'll hear more about some of the Algonquin tribes down here. Like I said, like the Nauset, the Pequot, the Wampanoag, they're up here around the Pilgrims. We'll see about them. And the Powhatan down here, who were the tribe of Pocahontas. Okay, P.S. Disney. Lies! All lies! This is not Pocahontas. This was nothing. This one isn't even quite the right accurate thing. Most people say she was only about 10 or 11 years old whenever all this went down, and the whole like John Smith love affair and all those lies like that. So when we get into those, they get into Jamestown and stuff, we'll talk more about Pocahontas and the Powhatan tribe, but we're going to skip that right now, okay? All right, the Iroquois were the other people that we're going to talk about. These were the guys that were in the red circle up in upstate New York, okay? Most of the time you're going to see them talk about 5 major tribes of the Iroquois. Sometimes they add in a 6th, okay? You got the Seneca, the Cayuga, the Onondaga, the Oneida, and the Mohawk are the normal 5, and then sometimes they add in this Tuscarora extra tribe, okay? But most of the time it's these 5. And this was the flag of the 5 nations of the Seneca, what they call the Seneca, or of the Iroquois, I mean. The Iroquois Nation, the Iroquois League, the Iroquois Confederacy. There's all these different names for this sort of government they came up with, and we'll see more about that. So you got the Seneca, the Cayuga. The Onondaga gets this white pine tree in the middle because that was sort of the symbol of peace. And a guy we're going to see later on called the Peacemaker was from the Onondaga tribe. So that's why they get that part. And then the Oneida and the Mohawk. And then sometimes, like I said, they add in this Tuscarora. Okay, so we're going to see about the Iroquois here. All right, the Iroquois lived in what's now upper part of New York State, consisted of 5 or maybe sometimes 6 those major tribes: the Seneca, Cayuga, Onondaga, Oneida, Mohawk, and then sometimes there's that Tuscarora. If you know anything about up in New York, there's these things called the Finger Lakes, and they're sort of over here, kind of just a little bit northeast of us, right across the New York State line. And a lot of those lakes, called the Finger Lakes, because they look like about 5 fingers here, like a hand. And those lakes are named after some of these tribes. There's the Seneca, Cayuga, Oneida. Some of those lakes up there are named after this. Okay, so they're the ones here in upstate New York, the Iroquois tribes. And they got grouped together just because basically they spoke sort of the same language that the English people heard. All right, so there they are. There's the 5 different tribes there. Okay, so even though there were 5 different tribes, they're grouped together by the similar language that they spoke. And we're going to see, when you guys come back, we're going to watch a little video, and they very much were different tribes. We're going to see how they kind of like almost killed each other to the point of extinction. Painting of an Iroquois warrior, probably from maybe like the Mohawk tribe. You know, they did get the name Mohawk for the sort of the haircut that those guys had. You know, that's what they call Mohawks these days. It's kind of like people in an Iroquois village. We'll sort of see what that consisted of. Okay, like the Algonquins, the Iroquois used the trees that grew around them. They built the palisades outside of their little villages. They built their homes from them. And these houses, they called them long houses. You get sort of the drift. They're very long. And this is a pretty big recreational one. You know, that door's not 100% person height there. It's a little bit shorter. That's probably maybe like a 4-foot opening. So, you know, 4, 8, 12. These things could be, you know, anywhere up to about 20 feet tall. And some of them they found post molds. Remember the post molds where they find the dark rings in the ground where the trees had rotted? Okay, so some of these they found are like 60 feet long. So they're pretty big. They got a wooden frame on the inside, covered in bark and reeds and things like that, like the other things, and then, you know, kind of covered up to hold all that on there. And I'll show you some inside pictures of a longhouse, an Iroquois longhouse. Okay, like I said, about 20 feet tall, 60 feet long. Sometimes they had several rooms on the inside, different, you know, racks on the sides here where people slept and they stored things. This is like corn storage bins out here. Several related families lived together inside these longhouses, and sometimes they're divided into different rooms like that. You can see different rooms with fires, and, you know, maybe different branches of the family lived in like different rooms and things. And like I said, over here on the eastern Woodlands, they were a patriarchal society. Pa, like dad. So ladies, when you got married, you went and lived with your husband's side of the family, and it went down through a male ancestor. This is like kind of an artist rendition. The inside of a longhouse looked like, you know, you got different things. You got a couple fire rings. You got benches to sit on. Bedding areas covered in deer hides. Things hanging up here, probably like fish drying and all things like that. Different storage racks, but, you know, different hides on the wall and things. So, you know, pretty cool looking place inside there. Probably was smoky. Probably smelled a little bit like, you know, things, but that's how they lived. Okay, so that's the inside of a longhouse. Okay, here's a typical Iroquois village with rows of longhouses and then the palisade around the outside of the village. How do we know this? How do we know that how these were kind of set up? Well, like we said, the post molds. They find the post molds of the rotted off, you know, the logs in the ground basically that made the frames, and they go around and find them, and they're able to kind of lay out the way a village was, how long the houses were, the long houses were, how far apart they were, where the palisades were, all that kind of cool stuff like that. All right. Okay, the longhouse was the symbol of the Iroquois. Okay, just as several families shared a longhouse and lived in there together, the Iroquois shared the lands they lived on. Okay, this was not always the case, though. We're going to get into this little thing we call the Dark Times. And there was like a 500 or 600 year period where all the different Iroquois tribes, the Seneca and the Onondaga and the Oneida and the Onondaga and the Cayuga and maybe the Tuscarora, they were in a horrible, horrible fighting war against each other, eye for eye, tooth for a tooth kind of thing that we'll see. But anyway, so when they finally unite and they form this thing called like the Iroquois League, the longhouse was the symbol of the Iroquois because basically like how several families could live together, all these tribes could end up living together and living in peace together. All right, so we're up over sorry, we're up over 10 minutes. When we come back, we'll kind of hopefully be able to wrap this up with this time period called the Dark Times that I just kind of explained about. Okay, so this was the end of part 4. And we come back, we'll hopefully wrap it up with part 5. Okay.